Marissa Baker is a professor of environmental health at the University of Washington who helped lead the study. And she says the amounts they found were too small to have health effects on riders.
I continue to feel safe on buses and trains. You can always move if you're on the bus and you feel like, it doesn't smell good or you're uncomfortable. And it never hurts to wash your hands.
Even so, area transit agencies say they're working on upgrading their air filtration and cleaning processes and adding new mental health support for operators. This is KUOW News.
Support for NPR comes from Mattress Firm. Whether customers browse online or in one of their stores, Mattress Firm is committed to providing personalized service and advice to help people choose the right mattress for their needs. Learn more at mattressfirm.com. This is NPR.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. Coming up this hour, putting a lid over I-5, putting a lid on the case of the praying high school football coach. We'll discuss that and more as we let you know what happened this week and what it means with my panel of excellent journalists, insiders, investigative reporter Katherine Long. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Seattle Channel host and producer Brian Callanan. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me too, Bill.
And independent health journalist Joanne Silberner was going to join us, but she lives on Bainbridge Island, and that ferry is not allowing vehicles this week, so there's just no way she's going to be able.
Wait.
What? Hey,
There she is.
how did you get here?
I got here by the ferry.
Oh, okay. It worked out. It sounded like chaos.
No.
I'm hearing people saying, I had no idea. They didn't tell me.
They
I can't
started
drive
telling
on."
people
can't-
back in last spring. And in fact, there were complaints. Why are you telling us this early? They have been telling people, and there is a way not to know, and that is to have never left your house, because there's signs on all the on the big roads. And if you've never left your house and you're not on the internet, and this is the first ferry ride you've taken, and they warn you all over the ferry, then it's possible. But I think there are very few people who match that description.
Okay. This no motorcycles. You didn't get to ride your motorcycle
No,
no
no.
bicycles, no scooters, no cars. And this is because of seismic upgrades on the Seattle side at Coleman
not
Dock.
seismic, but they're putting in all new on the Bainbridge side. They're putting in all new walkways.
Oh, okay.
For seismic reasons,
Oh.
and it's really cool to see. They have everything all laid out. They're really huge bits of walkway, and they're bringing in a crane, I guess, today, and they're going to put it in place.
Oh.
It's taking up the parking lot on the Bainbridge side. I think
Okay.
emergency vehicles. I think there's one lane for emergency vehicles. So if you're having a baby or something, you can probably make it over.
Well, thank you for stealing that ambulance and coming over
Right.
to be on the show.
I walked on.
You can watch this show on YouTube or Facebook. We're streaming it for you. Just search KUOW Public Radio. Let's get out the news of this week. A Seattle Police Department employee was fired this week after he was accused of fomenting a rumor about the chief of police. The rumor is that Police Chief Adrian Diaz had a romantic relationship with someone he later hired to be a top-level advisor. Diaz is married and says through his attorney that this is just a work relationship. It has never been romantic. So he denies that rumor. And so that's where it stays for now. But this firing of this employee who repeated the rumor comes less than a day after KUOW reported on the various external and internal inquiries that have been launched as a result of the rumor spreading through the police department. So, Katherine, without knowing for sure the nature of this, the disputed nature of this relationship, and given the police chief's denial, what do you think our listeners should know about this, if anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to dig into here. There's a lot that we don't know about this. I guess the takeaway that I had from this whole kerfuffle is, wow, what an unforced error for the SPD that already has so much criticism directed its way. It's already grappling with a staffing shortage. To have this kind of rumor leak into public, first of all, and also to spend so much time internally, as KUOW reported, there's this sprawling internal investigation into the source of the rumor, which seems to have taken up a lot of time and attention inside the department.
Right. In fact, Chief Diaz even told the FBI and the Homeland Security Department about rumors that some police officers maybe were following this advisor around. And so there's this question. KUOW talked with a couple of law enforcement evolved attorneys who said that going to these federal, the feds about this was, quote, outrageous and outlandish. They didn't say it's a policy violation, but the levels that the police chief apparently went to start investigative balls rolling is now public.
It was a lot. And I guess in looking at it, I'm not quite sure how you quash a rumor like this. And he went also to the Seattle Ethics and Elections Board to try to talk to them about what was going on. They didn't start any sort of an investigation. There's no word yet that any federal investigation is underway here, but it really did get me thinking about, how do you do that? How do you actually quash a rumor? How do you get around to it? And I guess involving these federal agents does appear like a big step, but we're talking about Chief Diaz, a family man, as he has put it publicly, has kids, all that. He wants to make sure that this thing is taken care of. And so I think that's what we're seeing play out here with this firing. And I'm with you, Catherine. I was really interested to see that this is someone who got fired here, was very high up on his command staff. And so when you have that sort of internal combustion, if you will, it can turn into something that is not healthy for the department. So we'll see where we go from here. I know there's a lot more to this story, but that was unfortunate to see.
Joanne, before I hear from you, I just want to point out that, first of all, the fired employee was not one of the many people who KUOW reporters spoke to. And those reporters, Ashley and Isolde, spoke to some 20 different sources about how much, how distracting in their opinion, how much this is sort of roiling at least parts of the police department. So that's part of their reasoning that this is worth discussing, is that this is happening at a time when, you would think the police chief needs the confidence of a Seattle Police Department with a lot on its hands.
I went back and forth. I've been an editor for a couple of years during my career, and would I have run this? And, if you talked to me 5 minutes ago, I had one answer. 5 minutes from now, I might have another. And at first, though, my first impression was, why are they doing this? This is a rumor.
Yeah.
But then when in the story, when they talked about that he contacted the FBI and Homeland Security, well, now we're bringing in federal agencies into the functioning of a problematic police department. Then it's starting to become a story. And then, they really got into problems within the police department, that it's hurting the functioning. And it is, as Catherine said, an unforced error that's not needed. But then when I think about it, though, we don't know exactly what he asked FBI and Homeland Security. What if he asked them, what do I do about this rumor? What if it was, not, sort of bringing in the feds to try and heavy hand things. But what if it's like, what do I do? Then then maybe it's still not a story.
Yeah, that's fair. The account and Isolde Raftery and Ashley Haruka went on KUOW's Soundside, and which you can hear. You can download the podcast of Soundside. There's they published an online version of this, an update. So on the firing, so you can read their work and judge for yourself. And I don't trust myself to be perfect in explaining it for them. But they also let the public know, KUOW did, that the Accountability Office is conducting what's called an intake investigation into these complaints, so that they'll decide whether there's going to be a formal investigation. That's where things sit.
The OPA, the Office of Police Accountability.
Yes.
And as much as it's affecting the functioning of a police department that's come under heavy scrutiny. So that does make it a story. But, and they did, if you listen to the story, they're very careful to always call it a rumor. They never slipped in their conversation on Soundside, which is brilliant and I think really worth listening to for people concerned about this issue. They made it clear this is always a rumor. It's always a rumor. But as journalists, it's a tough thing to talk about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, so we'll certainly learn more about what comes of this intake investigation and see what more happens. Since we're talking about the Seattle Police Department, this week a federal judge ruled that SPD has complied on most of the issues that the federal government's been monitoring it for years. Not all the issues, though, Brian. So how significant is that judge's finding?
This is a big deal. So this is Judge James Robart. He's been looking at the Seattle Police Department for the past 11 years plus. This is the consent decree that you've probably heard about a lot of times. And so what he's saying is that the Seattle Police Department, on a big one here, it's doing a constitutional job now of using force. And that was the big concern back in 2011 when this happened. So he's saying, all right, use of force, crisis intervention, bias policing, strong oversight. This is all working well within the police department right now, but there are two things that he does want to keep control over, and that would be with regard to officer accountability, which is a huge one, and crowd control, which is another interesting one too. So this isn't the full boat, like everything's all clear and we're done here. There's definitely a work that still needs to be done within the SPD, and it's these two pieces of crowd control and officer accountability. They're going to be very difficult over the next couple of years, and I say a couple of years because even if the SPD puts a policy in place that is good to go when it comes to crowd control, let's say, just looking at that first, we don't really know what that's going to be like until there's another big protest, right?
Yeah.
How does that actually work out for people who are out in the field? And on the officer accountability, this is one that I know will lead to a lot more discussion here. This one's very interesting too, because we're at a point right now, and the judge recognizes this, we're at a point right now where the Seattle Police Officers Guild hasn't had a contract for 2+ years now, and they're in the middle of a negotiation with the city. And what the judge is saying, we can't negotiate accountability, but that's going to be something that's going to be really scrutinized over the next couple of months here. I know the city wants to come up with the deal for SPOG, the Police Officers Guild, but that's another part of the question, because back in 2019, the Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin at the time actually rolled back some of the accountability measures that the city had put in place in 2017. So this is something that the judge is paying very close attention to. I think this officer accountability is really at the center of his concern.
Brian, were you surprised? I mean, when I looked at the news coverage of this, they had the judge lauding the commanders and officers for what they did, and it was very complimentary, and I was surprised. Were you surprised?
It was, but he also said this is the beginning. And I think that's an important part of this too. This isn't a check done type of situation. I think he's saying this work, and I think you'll hear that from all the police officers, Chief Diaz as well. Yeah, we've reached a milestone here, but that doesn't mean we're all done. And certainly some of the people like the ACLU are out there saying, okay, that's great, we've made some progress here, but guess what? We could use some more work when it comes to biased policing for sure, and a number of these different issues.
Some SPD commissioned some studies showing a problem with sort of racially disparate use of force.
Yep.
And that wasn't even part of the official consent decree.
It was not, yeah,
PD
but it's
working.
something that the SPD needs to keep an eye on. So yeah, that's going to be something. It was basically the end of the beginning. That great phrase there. Yeah, please.
It's a Churchill quote, and Judge Robart credited, and he said the end of the beginning. The full quote is, "Now this is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning."
Well said. Yeah, it's just a process that needs to keep on going.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see what kind of accountability provisions are negotiated in these ongoing contract negotiations with the Police Officers Guild, and what Judge Robart thinks of those.
Yeah, because the judge himself cannot insert himself within those negotiations. That's something that the city needs to do. And as much as he is saying, you can't negotiate accountability, it is going to be negotiated. I think that's going to be very clear here. So what comes out of it, I'm very interested in this too, but I think the scrutiny is at a much higher level right now on something that's been very private over the years. These contract negotiations, they're not going to be public. I know the city has fought for that over the years, but it is something that a lot of people, including advocates around our city, are going to be keeping a very close eye on.
So Brian, can you give us one more bottom line? Because you started out saying that this finding of this approval, the federal judge's approval of most of the aspects of this consent decree, is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just listening to KUOW. How will I notice? Who's going to get treated differently? Why is this? Give us an example of how life has changed this week.
I think it's a reflection of something that has changed over the past several years. So I think it's something that has already changed within the police department. And it's important to point out, especially with the use of force here, this was really at the center, I think, of this consent decree. It's been on the decline steadily for the past several years, down 49% between the period of 2015 and 2021. So I just think for the average person, that's an important part of it. And then also, for the average person out there, I think this means that the SPD should be able to concentrate on changing the culture of the department rather than trying to appease a federal judge. And they've got a lot of stuff on the table right now, including this new dual dispatch program that they're going to be rolling out later on this year, where they're going to have some officers here, going to have some social workers here. Okay, who's going to this 911 call? It's just a person down. Let's send the social worker. So I think there's a lot of things that are in play for the police department right now. This consent decree is just basically an announcement of, I think, where we've been over the past couple of years.
I could see it possibly being being a bit of a moral victory as well, morale victory rather,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
a department
both.
that has struggled to recruit new officers in part because of low morale.
Right, right. Okay, so crowd control, we'll see, as
Yeah.
you said, and officer accountability being negotiated.
Yeah.
Okay, more to come. Boy, my guests know a lot.
Yeah. Every now and then.
About
Yeah.
the week gone by. This is KUOW's Week in Review with Joanne Silberner, Katherine Long, Brian Callanan. I'm Bill Radke. Let's take a short break and see about putting a hat on Interstate 5. We'll be right back.
Support for KUOW comes from Amazon, partnering with local food banks to help meet the needs of families experiencing food insecurity in the Puget Sound. Amazon uses its transportation network to deliver groceries to families and students in need.
Melissa Etheridge is a queer rock icon, but she's also endured significant loss over decades in the public eye, and she's all the wiser for it.
Ultimately, it's not about what everyone thinks about you. There's the only person judging you is yourself, and that's what can do the most damage.
I'm Juana Summers, a new memoir from Melissa Etheridge on All Things Considered from NPR News.
All Things Considered airs today from 3 to 6 p.m. on 94.9 KUOW Seattle.
Support for KUOW comes from Archbright, offering virtual and in-person training on supervision, management, communication, and collaboration. Available for individual enrollment or as private team trainings. Details at archbright.com.
If you're on Facebook or YouTube, you can see Seattle Channel's Brian Callanan, Insider's Katherine Long, health journalist Joanne Silberner, and me, Bill Radke. Otherwise, take my word for it, we are discussing the news of the week. A plan to build a lid over Interstate 5 in downtown Seattle got a nod of approval this week from the city council. It's early. This is a resolution, Katherine.
It's a resolution to support the idea.
Yes, of the notion of, but it does allow the city, or it's the first step in the city applying for federal money for this, which the city's going to want because it could cost but somewhere between 1 and 2.5 billion.
Untold billions.
Untold is a
Bill.
better way to put
So
it,
many more.
because we know how these things go. So, Katherine, you want to start us off with some pro cons about why lid I-5 or don't?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. If this could be done tomorrow, major pro. Completely. I-5 we know is an open sore. The history of constructing I-5 is racist. It destroyed neighborhoods. Turning I-5 into something lidded with possibly a park or more housing, I think everybody would support the idea of that, or maybe the resolution of the idea to do that.
Right.
I think the cons really come into the execution. Actually doing this, we don't know how much it could cost. It's going to be in the billions, certainly. We don't know how long it might take. And I think there's also, in my opinion, an equity argument to be made. Some of the folks who have been advancing the idea of putting a lid on I-5 have said, listen, we're running out of space to build affordable housing. We need to do this now. This is an opportunity. The freeway needs to have some seismic upgrades anyways. If we're going to do that, we might as well think about putting a lid on it at the same time.
Right.
My response to that is, there are plenty of places around Seattle that we could stick some more affordable housing. Why spend billions of dollars doing it on a freeway?
Yeah. And of course, we know what's been hard about that, the opposition that comes with the densifying. But yeah, when a project isn't even started yet, you don't always thinking about the opposition or the downsides or all that. Yeah.
That's
but
right.
Densifying has been hard so far for Seattle.
It exists. And it's interesting to look at this resolution and the vote that happened with it. It was 3 votes. It's only 5 council members
Very
were there.
close.
Yeah. Only 5 council members.
Why were there only 5 votes?
Coming off of a holiday there? They had a quorum. 5 is okay.
Yeah.
But not every,
Yeah,
people
3
were
to 2.
excused. People were excused for the absence.
But it wasn't because it was so hot, but
No.
people didn't want to
No.
be on the record.
No,
Okay,
but I will say that the 3 council members who did vote for it, and we're looking at Herbold, Strauss, and Lewis. Okay, we got them over here. On the other side, they didn't vote no, but they abstained in voting, and that was Sarah Nelson and Alex Peterson. They have some concerns over the cost of this, and I think that's part of the pushback here. Okay, if we're resolving to be a part of this, what are we committing to? And it was made clear in the meeting there that there's really no committing to anything in terms of dollars and cents. But I was interested in this part of it, Katherine, or Joanne, if you have a thought about this. The whole idea of as I understand it, if you just make it into if you make it into a park type of a lid, that's closer to that 1 billion side of things. If you do the development, all that, that's closer to 2.5 billion. And those are numbers from a 2020 report that Mayor Durkin commissioned.
And not just for the buildings, but just to build a platform
Right.
that you could build on is different from flowers.
Correct. Yeah. Right. Good point. But what I'm thinking is, if you do get developers on board, then maybe those developers help defray some of those costs. Does that enter into the equation at all? What do you think? I mean, would that help to really try to build it up and making it as something bigger, so you could get some private dollars coming?
Make it profitable.
Yeah.
I think that's a great question. I think that in this interest rate environment, developers are not going to be interested in taking on that kind of risk. I mean, we saw sort of the difficulties in getting the convention center expansion done during the pandemic, and the type of public support that was needed to ultimately get that over the finish line. I doubt that many risk-mindful developers would be jumping at the bit to take on a project like this.
Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah.
Can I just bring up the big dig? East Coasters will recognize this. Anyone who was near Boston in the last part of the 20th century will know what happened there. They put, it was about, I think it was 1.5 miles underground, and they put a park on top. But then there were several other airport approaches, other things in there. So it was probably a little bit more extensive. But in $1982, the initial estimate was, let me just look this up, was 2.8 billion. When they finished, by the way, 21 years later, it was 7.4 billion was the cost.
Yeah.
And if you want to do it in 2020 dollars to get a sense of it, it was it went from 7.4 billion to 21.5 billion.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
There was a huge cost overrun. And then I'm going to just read you the list of problems. Cost overruns, delays, leaks, design flaws, charges of poor execution, use of substandard materials, criminal charges and arrests. And one motorist died when the top of the tunnel came down on them. They had to redo the whole top of the tunnel. I mean, I would love to see this done. It would make such a difference to downtown. But first of all, if it takes as long then from planning to completion as it did, I'll be 90 years old when it's done.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much I'm going to get to enjoy it. And second of all, it's going to be chaotic.
Yeah. The disruption.
I mean, and this is for years. It's going to be, and I just look at what happened over at Montlake, and that was much smaller in size than this. So
the viaduct.
Yeah. Fixing up, the approach to 520
Right.
and capping the bit there, it was just really disruptive. And this is in a much more heavily trafficked area. Like I said, I'd love to see it done, but on a 3-2 vote on this, or 3-2 abstention vote on the city council, we're going to need a lot more support, and people are going to have to really buy into it for this to happen.
And it's not just the city either. We're talking about the city. We're talking about the state. We're talking about federal help
Right,
too,
it's
because
I-5.
we're talking about an interstate here. So that's the part of it where I'm kind of waiting to see what happens here. And I just don't know how you get that amount of agreement together on such a mega project like this one. It's a lot, which isn't to say you shouldn't do it. I mean,
Right.
we've had successful lids around our area here. And again, it would be great to see it, but there are definitely some major caveats with
And
this.
is there anything to be learned from what happened down on the waterfront?
How do you mean?
How to do things, how to get things done, whether we can take on something this big.
Yeah.
I wish the former mayor of Seattle, Mike McGinn, were here, because I don't know whether he would say, yeah, it would be a big disruption to people driving in their cars, and hallelujah.
Right.
Don't know.
That's probably what he'd say. Yeah.
Okay, let's keep moving. Well, so that's as a resolution to support the fancy of the notion of the dream of a possible asking for the feds for money to put a lid over some amount of Interstate 5 downtown. Okay, another much talked about issue this week. Remember the Bremerton High School assistant football coach? He defended his right to pray at midfield, defended it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and won. He got his old job back, and last Friday he finally returned to the field, played one game, prayed on that field, and then he quit this week. Joe Kennedy says he left because his father-in-law is very sick. He says the Bremerton School District retaliated against him. Catherine, are there any reasons not to believe any of his claims?
I'm going to say, first of all, that I am perhaps among the minority of Seattleites who believe that we should maybe cut Pray and Joe Kennedy some slack. I think that at least back in 2015, when this saga started, he seemed to be a Christian coach who wanted his players to succeed. And he very genuinely felt that the way to get them to win games was to get them a little bit closer to God. The school
And let's just say there's a lots of players at all level who they scored touchdown, all the glory to God. I mean, this is not
Certainly.
that unusual.
Right. The school district
he's an
didn't like
authority
it.
figure.
He is an authority
Yeah.
figure. He was asking his players to pray with him in the locker rooms before games and also after games at midfield. The school district didn't like it. They asked him to stop, and he initially agreed, which I think is something that sometimes gets left out of the story. And then this right-wing legal institute from Texas, the Liberty Institute, got into the fray. And that's when things started really spiraling. They convinced him to restart the prayers. His contract with the school district did not get renewed. They took his case all the way to the Supreme Court, where they characterized it in a way that was perhaps inconsistent with reality. They many times said that he had been fired, which was not true. They said that he wanted his job back, which I believe he was offered the opportunity to get his job back, and he did not apply for it.
Could have done it last year. Yeah,
Exactly.
right.
And
But the Supreme Court seemed to believe that he legitimately felt like there's a way to get somebody to quit without literally firing them. I mean, that was discussed, right? And the Supreme Court seemed to think that he wasn't treated right.
Right. I mean, I think, he was certainly pressured by the school district to please stop praying
Yes.
with the players.
Yes.
And he seemed to think that was a violation of his liberties.
Mhm.
I think also that somewhere between then and now, he has discovered, or people close to him have discovered, that there is potentially a little bit more profit in being a right-wing influencer than being a high school football coach.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's where I start to lose sympathy.
Yeah.
Well, he was a part-time assistant football coach.
Right.
It was not a big gig of his.
No, he got
Yes, he can-
$50,000.
Right.
That was it.
He's
putting food on the table, and,
That's
and who
right.
knows what else.
He's launched a new career as a motivational speaker.
Yeah.
He's been supporting Donald Trump on the campaign trail in 2016. Who
Mhm.
knows this time around? And he also has a new book coming out, for which I have been getting many marketing emails, all of which have been really touting his return to the field last week as a big selling point for this new book. And
Yeah.
I have to say, I think, this narrative arc of him returning for a final game and then quitting, as he said, in sort of an inimical environment from the school district.
Mhm.
So it's a pretty good way to sell some books, but
Yeah,
What do I know?
he was vindicated.
Well,
in his mind.
speaking of money here, Bremerton is going to have to pay court costs, I believe. And I have no idea how much that is, but it's not going to be a small amount. The taxpayers are going to get
I believe
stuck with that
it's
bill.
over $1 million.
Is it?
Wow.
Yeah.
That is how the system works.
Yeah, I guess I look at it too, and the piece that you don't hear a lot about in this whole shuffle is the players that are involved here. I mean, imagine being a player on that team over the last 4 years, let's say. I mean, COVID and all that other stuff notwithstanding, this is just a lot for a kid to go through. And I read a few different quotes from players who were saying, this game that Kennedy came back and coached, there was not a big gathering at the field after.
I saw that.
He basically went out and prayed by himself.
Yep.
And so I think a lot of these players are just saying, and one of them actually said, I don't want to be on TV like that,
Mhm.
and it was just like, I want to play football. I want to be in high school and I want to play football. And so when this turned into something that was a lot more than that, then I think that it, at least from a student's perspective, maybe some of them did want to pray with him, et cetera. But when that turned into the focus of what they're doing as a team, rather than actually playing as a team and just being high schoolers and playing football, that I think something was lost there too. And that's unfortunate. That's a really difficult thing for students to have to go through or be pushed into, I guess.
Yeah. It wasn't about the kids.
No, it sure didn't seem to be on that.
Well, I was glad, Catherine, you started out by saying that you feel in a minority of Seattleites to cut this guy some slack, because I have had the feel like I don't know this guy, and he could be mouth could be dripping with lies. I don't know Joe Kennedy. But I
we
do
can
feel like
start a rumor.
start a
Right.
rumor anyway.
Uh-oh.
But I do feel that there's been I've been listening to a kind of echo chamber of it. To me, it has felt, for me personally, it feels like this is about society's polarization. To most people, like if you don't like an authority figure doing a Christian prayer with high school students, understandably, and you're mad at the current Supreme Court, understandably, then you also become an authority on whether someone you've never met is a liar and who gets to stay in what job for how long, for what reason, and whether high school students are getting a civics lesson or they're just purely victims, and whether profiting off your life story is an immoral thing to do. You get to have all of those opinions, but I'm just saying you don't have to align your dismissiveness of a human being with your political take, but it's very hard for me, for everyone I know, to separate all those things.
I think you're certainly right. I'm sorry, Joanne.
Yeah, there's
you were
such a
saying something.
history of this. When I was in grade school, they were still arguing over the 1954 inclusion in the Pledge of Allegiance of under God. And this was 10 or 15 years later. It was such a hot argument throughout the 60s, and that's sort of been forgotten. And this might be forgotten except for the Supreme Court decision, but it's such a fundamental issue of the separation of church and state. And that's really not what's getting talked about here. And it should. That really is the issue.
And what do you think happens next? I mean, fallout from this. Where are we going to see the next Joe Kennedy, or is that going to happen? I know that Bremerton.
You'll see him on the big screen.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's stumping for candidates, et cetera. But
yeah, right.
Is this something?
Trump 2024.
Is there something where different coaches are going to try something here? I don't know. I just wonder what the actual fallout of the Supreme Court decision is.
Right.
Maybe it just forces more schools like Bremerton to be very rigid in terms of, okay, here's the rules, here's how we're going to do it in compliance with the Supreme Court. But I don't know. Do you think there's other Joe Kennedy coaches out there that are going to try something like this? And anyone think?
I'm sure there are. I mean, Joe Kennedy has said that he was inspired to do this by an evangelical movie that showed a football team starting to win after it began to pray. I'm sure he's not the only person who saw that and got an idea from it.
Yeah.
It's a good question about how many school districts how many coaches there are preying on fields and courts and gyms because of it. I that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Regarding Bremerton, I did read that I think I read this in the Seattle Times, that the school district changed its policy to say, okay, you can pray if you're not actively supervising players,
right,
and you keep a certain distance from the students when the prayers begin, and after that, the students can join you if they want to. They got more specific about what they're allowing. So that's a civics lesson. That's interesting right there.
Yeah, I hope so. And it just leads me back to that whole argument that was going forth in the Supreme Court. Were these players being coerced in some way to pray? And I don't know if that's the right verb, but wow, I sure would have felt pressured if I were a player there, leading by example. There's my coach. What am I supposed to do? I guess I'm supposed to follow my coach. And I don't know. That's a tough one for students to think about.
I definitely would have felt pressure.
Yeah.
And then that led to a Supreme Court conversation about whether that internal feeling of a student who may or may not feel pressure, and students aren't all the same.
True.
How does that bear on this person's rights? And a different court is going to, a changed court in the future might decide this very differently. Before we take a break, can I get a here on Week in Review? There was a report out this week, Joanne, about how many people in mental or behavioral health crisis are getting turned away from our local treatment facilities, like more than 1,000 times a year. Would you tell us why that's happening?
Well, it's happening because the facilities turn them away because the patients or the prospective patients are too sick, or they're too aggressive, or they have developmental disabilities like autism, things that can be hard to deal with in a situation. Navos, which is one of the groups, said that they have trouble taking people with wounds because they don't have nurses on hand to take care of them, or if they need regular dialysis treatment, that becomes a home management problem. They might have a mobility issue. And only 10% of them to the turnaways, which was 26% of people presented to facilities, 26% were turned away. I mean, that's just too high. I mean, the facilities can't handle them. Maybe we need to get some better facilities.
Yeah, and it's not just a lack of beds. In other words, you're
No,
saying
only
there are people
10%, only
they need
10%.
too much help. Like they're in trouble, and
I know.
right, and so
Then that's
Didn't have
why
the
we
right
so
personnel to help
Right.
them.
So
Yeah.
so what gives? I mean, aren't these the facilities that people are supposed to go to?
Right.
right.
When they're in
Yeah.
trouble and they need help?
And people say they're working on it. But there's been no real significant improvement over the last couple of years, at least.
Well, Brian,
Yeah.
the King County voters passed a levy to address just this.
Yeah,
this
in
spring?
April. Yeah. This was the Crisis Care Centers levy, and it passed with a lot of support. And I think a lot of people have recognized something like what we're talking about here, a walk-in type of clinic to deal with behavioral health issues. That's what this crisis care levy was all about. A lot of people wanted to support that and tax themselves to make that happen. I think the issue with that, though, is this crisis care centers levy, that was great with the vote, but it's not really going to have facilities online. King County would not until 2026, it looks like. So I think this has been a problem for many, many years, not having enough of the facilities that are needed for the people who need help. And these people, as you talked about, Joanne, they need more help. And it's a very diverse type of help. It's not just the medical, it's the mental. Oh, guess what? There's some addiction issues and some other things too. And so there's some very specific facilities that can help them out. Harborview is one of them,
Right.
but that's more of like an emergency type of situation. You don't want to keep people in that hospital type setting for too long either. So this is something that our region has struggled with. It's happening all around the country. And I'm hopeful that this crisis care centers levy can do that, because it's supposed to be that everybody walk in, you can get a reference from law enforcement or your family, or just walk in yourself. But I don't think that we can get them online fast enough.
Right. And what you say about Harborview is true. I think their turnaway rate was something like 2%.
Right.
As opposed to
They're set up
26.
to
They got the
to-
They're set
personnel.
up to take it because they can take care of people who have wounds or
Yeah.
need dialysis or need. But Brian's exactly right. That's not necessarily where you want people long term.
And we have another healthcare story that was fascinating to me, and I thought very well reported in Crosscut, that we're going to address as we continue with Week in Review right after we take a little break, and we're going to be right back. Don't go away.
Support for KUOW comes from the healthcare group at Ryan Swanson Law, lawyers helping healthcare providers from large companies to individuals with compliance, litigation, business, and employment challenges across the region. Online at ryanswansonlaw.com.
I'm Julian Marshall, host of BBC News. On today's programme, we ask Gabon's new interim prime minister appointed by the military if he believes the soldiers will restore democracy. And we tell the story of the Six, America's first women astronauts who broke the glass ceiling at NASA.
Those stories and a whole lot more today on BBC NewsHour. It begins at 1 p.m. right after Week in Review on 94.9 KUOW.
Support for KUOW comes from Synergy Systems, an employee-owned company with over 2,000 solar installations in the Puget Sound area. Synergy Systems is dedicated to educating homeowners on solar energy and providing site analysis. Consultations available at solarmadesimple.com.
KUOW's Week in Review this week is Seattle Channel host Brian Callanan, independent health journalist Joanne Silberner, insider investigative reporter Katherine Long. I'm Bill Radke, and there was a report in Crosscut this week that the people who fight our wildfires, our increasing number of wildfires, are increasingly urban or at least exurban wildfires, Katherine, are inhaling that smoke without respirators. Why is that?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I thought this article was fascinating. The reporter Hannah Weinberger did a great job.
Agreed.
The reasons as she reported are complex for why wildland firefighters don't have working respirators. There's a profit reason, there's a technology reason, and there is seemingly a bit of a human element in there as well. Taking them one by one, it seems like respirator manufacturers don't feel like the market is large enough to allow them to profitably make respirators that would work for wildland firefighters. The technology reason is that these respirators would need to do a lot. They would need to do a lot more than other respirators that firefighters currently use. They need to be able to obviously filter particulate matter from the air, but also they need to be really light so that these firefighters can carry them. And they need to be so well functioning that firefighters can use them while they're basically doing the equivalent of running a marathon with a 30-pound weight on their back.
Yeah.
And that combination is quite difficult to manufacture. And then the final element is changing the behavior of wildland firefighters who have not used respirators in the past and feel like maybe using one going forward could infringe on their ability to do their jobs the way that they've done it so far. That being said, these respirators are clearly needed. I guess wildland firefighters are dying from complications of cardiovascular disease and lung cancer at rates that are far higher than the rest of the population. And it sounds like tests are ongoing to develop a new model of respirator that might work and check all the boxes.
What about the issue of a lot of these folks being convicts who were given the option to go out and do this, but guess what? We're not going to give you safety equipment.
Yeah, this is something that I find fascinating. The number of wildland firefighters who are inmate volunteers is quite high. In California, about 30% of wildland firefighters are prison inmates. They're volunteering through a program that allows them to learn forestry skills, but also they fight fires.
They are volunteering. They do have the option to.
They have the option. I have some questions, and others have some questions as well about, if you're in prison and you don't have a ton of opportunities to get job experience, you're thinking about, what am I going to do after I get out of here? And this is one option for you where you can leave the prison. You can have a little bit more freedom and control over your life. This sounds maybe attractive, but the flip side is it's very risky.
Yeah, it's difficult work. And I just wanted to jump in because I've covered wildfires before in my work as a TV news reporter, and on a very, I'm not in there battling and chopping down, limbs and things like that, but I've been there with the Nomex suit and the boots on and rolling through and driving through roads where you see the canopy like burning on either side. It's like, we got to get the heck out of here. And so I just remember trying to be in those situations and just the active breathing, how difficult that was. I mean, the fire is taking all that oxygen away, basically. And so you're left in these situations where it's so difficult. And you talk about these heroes that are out there doing this type of work, just the amount of load that they're putting on themselves to be breathing as hard as they are and doing all the work that they do, it's a lot. And again, I know only a fraction of it, but in talking with these workers, they are a very proud group. And I think that they want to do this work. They're proud of what they do. But at the same time, I think they're getting overextended, because the other part of Hannah's article that I thought was very telling is that this whole fire season that used to be, that's just from that later part of summer and then it'll be over with in the autumn. Guess what? That's going almost year round now. So in terms of doing something for these wildland firefighters, we have to do something, because we're going to lose a lot of these people if we keep putting them in harm's way like this again and again and again.
I also think we need to say, I mentioned exurban at the top, because more and more of you might think, fires, that's trees and grass. That's organic. First of all, even a wild, pure brush fire, et cetera, is not good for your lungs. And not only that, but more and more of these fires happen in the interface between the natural world and the built world. So now you're talking about toxic chemicals from human-made structures getting into people's lungs.
Yeah, that's the interaction that we're talking about. Los Angeles dealing with that a lot now, and I think it's happening in our region too. And it's just, you think about the different training that firefighters have to go through when they get into this kind of wildland situation. Sure, they're going to call in some backup, but again, is that backup always going to be there? They have to be ready for all these different situations.
Well, this is going to sound sort of this is a little dark, but when you said that these manufacturers don't see enough profit in making these kinds of respirators, I thought, unfortunately, there seems to be more and more demand for respirators like this. So, okay, well, I commend you to that reporting in Crosscut from Hannah Weinberger. Don't have the headline right in front of me, but you can find it. Good work on that. Before we're getting toward the end of the show. Speaking of respirators, Joanne, you being a health reporter, I wanted to ask you if the uptick in COVID cases have you masking up more than you were when summer began, or any of you?
Well, I'm over 65. So yes, absolutely. In crowds, I do it. It's I don't mask outside or when it's a very well ventilated area. The uptick is from a very low point. You know, when you compare it to Omicron or Delta surges, it's really not much. There is a new, there's a new vaccine coming out, I think in a couple of weeks. The health department seems to think it's only a couple of weeks away. They were throughout the summer saying, go ahead and get up to date on your vaccination anyway. Don't wait for the new vaccination. Now they're saying, well, you might want to talk to your doctor about waiting for the new vaccination. It sort of depends. And they didn't want to issue a blanket statement. So it's coming back a little bit. It's not way, way, way back. But it's still there. It's we're living with it.
I think we're seeing more cases, and I've talked to my doctor too, and it's like, okay, maybe do the COVID flu vaccine combo coming up here later in September. I think it's something that's on everybody's mind. I've been kind of lax and staying up to date on COVID vaccinations for sure. And I'd like to be on top of that because I've had COVID before. It's no fun. And I know it's taken millions of lives. And so, it's something that's top of mind for me. And when we see these cases go up, even when it is just a little bit, I certainly get concerned about it.
Well, the number of 2.6 out of every 100,000, well, I really should get this number right. 2.6 hospitalizations out of every 100,000 people is what we were at last week. That's pretty low, but if it's rising, this has been the one predictable thing about COVID is that it is really unpredictable.
And is there do we know that there's no downside? I'm thinking what might listeners be wondering? Because Brian mentioned getting the COVID flu combo. Is there any medical downside to getting 2 shots at once?
Not with those two. I think with RSV, which is a third one that people might want to consider this year now that it's available.
RSV is this
respiratory syncytial virus, which is serious for babies and for people with bad immune system or compromised immune systems or elderly people. With RSV, I think that there's an issue, but COVID and the flu, I think, are okay to get at the same time, the 2 vaccinations. Okay. There are some doubters that, especially if you've had COVID before, that another vaccine is going to help. I looked at the data myself. I'm an amateur, obviously. I'm not an immunologist. I join the immunologists who do say, yes, the boosters help. They certainly help in the short run. They bring your antibodies up right away to a higher point. So they're at least good in the short run, and I'm certainly going to get mine.
And the guidance hasn't changed. You're in a crowded indoor place. Voluntary masking, recommended masking, all that's the same as it's been for.
Some of the hospitals are picking up now a little bit where they're having, in certain areas of the hospital or with certain clinicians and healthcare providers, they're asking them to mask. So they're upping their masking a little bit, but the county has not made any general masking announcements other than they've always recommended, small crowded places. They've always recommended it.
Final question. Do we know whether this is affecting vaccinations in general? Usually, most of that is among children. Decisions made by parents.
Yeah, the 91. I'm just looking at my numbers here. 91% of kids are up to date on routine vaccinations, 22 to 23. It was a slight decrease from maybe like less than a percentage point decrease from previous years. So vaccination is still is pretty good. Yeah. Could be better. I mean, with measles and these other diseases, you really want, they're very infectious and you really want them 100%.
Okay. We've got 5 minutes left in the show. We have some time to smile for the love of smiling. If there's anything in the news this week, did anyone come across something hopeful this week?
I don't know if it was hopeful, but it did make me smile. There's this guy down in the Florida area, Reza Bellucci is his name. And he was trying to go across the Atlantic Ocean using like a hamster wheel that he constructed out of floats or whatever else.
Yep.
He was kind of trying it during a hurricane. Not a good idea. And he's tried this before many times over the past several years. He's in some trouble with the court. I don't want to discount that. Might have a few mental issues going on. I don't want to discount that either. But in looking at this guy, I just thought, what grit to try to actually go across the Atlantic Ocean in a hamster wheel. I mean,
Yes.
if they can put a man on the moon, Bill, why can't we cross the Atlantic in a hamster wheel boat? Come on.
Yeah, I think he's been told not to do that
No,
anymore.
absolutely not.
But I share your soaring feeling when
Yes.
you see some of this colorful hamster wheel.
More
You know,
hamster wheels.
There's
Yes.
got to be a movie about that.
Yes.
It's coming. Anything else?
I have been following the saga of former Seattleite Dave Clark, a former Amazon executive who it looks like maybe is going to try to run for the governor of Texas. We'll see.
Oh.
He just got ousted from his post-Amazon job at a logistics company in very gossipy circumstances. All of that kerfuffle has, I've been following that as a former Amazon reporter, and that's been making me smile. But
Republican?
he hasn't said.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Because, sometimes politicians will turn their troubles and their accusations into a selling point. You never know. I don't know what happened with this guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll see.
Joanne, you made it here on a walk-on ferry.
That's
I know
not
that.
smile
Exactly
about,
what
yeah.
made me smile. This was done right. There's been so many problems on the ferry system, and really serious ones with staffing, with the boats themselves, with the failure of the state to put enough money into the system, in my opinion. This was something that worked, and whoever ran it, I don't know who ran it, they should be in charge of everything.
I noted a couple more stories you might hear more about. Washington State, we started auctioning off the right to emit carbon. Companies pay for that right. And this week was auction number 3, and the bidders keep on raising the price. It doesn't mean they pollute less, but the state uses the money to adapt or maybe even reduce climate change. Revenue so far, $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
Unfortunate news, homicides on pace in Seattle to exceed the all-time number. It's 57 so far, the record 69 in 1994. So
That's for the whole year.
Yeah.
That's for the whole year.
Yeah.
Amazon maybe is about to get sued by the Federal Trade Commission, according to the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg. Their reporting says this lawsuit would claim that Amazon's power in the online marketplace leads to unfair business practices. KUOW spoke to a company that helps sellers compete on Amazon. Justin Lay of Workflow Labs says that company is so powerful and automated that it's sort of anti-business, but whether that's antitrust and bad for customers would be harder to prove.
Everything about Amazon's platform is designed to increase selection and lower cost to customers.
So we'll see if that lawsuit gets made public this month. And finally, who gets to call themselves Pike Place? A great story. Did you see in the Seattle Times? Pike Place Fish Market is famous for throwing their fish inside the market. They also sell their fish outside the market with their mail order business. And the group that manages the market is suing the fishmongers for using the name Pike Place, allegedly infringing on the market's trademark and undermining its integrity and reputation. And the story gets into trademark law and tradition and who was there first. Why does Starbucks get to sell Pike Place coffee outside of the market? And I mean, you don't get more of a local icon than the name. I mean, Pike Place Market got its name from a city street, so maybe Seattle taxpayers deserve a cut as well.
That's a tough one.
That they then owe to the Duwamish people.
Yeah, right.
Stolen land made all this money making possible. So that was all interesting to me. And then just something, I don't know, I have a weak smile, I guess, was the fact that UW researchers they did find meth on every bus and train surface that they tested, and in almost all the air samples, and fentanyl on most of the surfaces. But the clinical toxology researcher, Dr. Rob Hendrickson, told KUOW the amount of drugs they found too small to harm drivers or riders.
In most cases.
No, isn't that just how every dollar bill has cocaine on it? Or, or is that an urban legend?
That's pretty much was my reaction. This doctor says an exposure would be hundreds to thousands of times lower than what we would expect to cause clinical effect.
Don't worry if you want to lick the bus seat.
Yeah. Not a good idea.
Maybe just hold the strap.
Right.
With a glove. I don't know. But okay. So that's pretty much it for the week. I think our work here is done. Thank you, everybody.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone.
That's Katherine Long there, investigative reporter at Insider. Brian Callanan, host and producer at Seattle Channel, waving at the camera. Independent health journalist Joanne Silberner. And thank you to producer Kevin Kniestedt and on the board, Bernard Ouellette, making it sound great. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
KUOW FM Seattle, KUOW Tumwater, and KQOW Bellingham. It's 1 o'clock, BBC NewsHour, just seconds